CRM Systems Explained, how to choose and implement the right customer relationship management software. In this episode, Jim Barker from Cooperative Computing reveals how most businesses struggle with their CRM systems and what successful organizations do differently. Through real-world examples spanning from yellow pages to AI-powered solutions, you'll learn how to select, implement, and maximize your customer relationship management technology. I'm your co-host Anthony Perl, and whether you're just starting your digital journey or looking to accelerate your existing efforts, it's time to get enabled digitally. Jim, I want to talk about something that's dear to you, I know, because it's how you got started, which is client relationship management systems, or CRMs as they're more commonly referred to. It is, I don't know if it's the starting point for all businesses, but it's usually a fairly key piece of technology that most businesses seemingly need to have these days, really.
Oh yeah. I believe this will go back to some of the conversations you and I had earlier around getting into a sales capacity for the first time and realizing that the yellow pages that my sales manager gave me and said, hey, here's your clientele, start calling. I realized pretty quickly, okay, that's not going to scale. Where the people, the other performers in the sales roles that were my peers would take those and write notes on them and call people back and do all of that. I realized at the time, and look, this was back in the mid-90s, I realized I need to have a better system than that. And so I naturally just said, okay, I'm going to go get something, put it on my laptop. I went and got the Daytime Organizer, which was the contact management system I used, which is really kind of what the commonplace CRM is today. Loaded it, went and instead of having the yellow pages, I bought the entire yellow page directory for $99. I still remember having to pay for that. I got it in a CSV file, uploaded into it, and then that was my method of calling on people in there and documenting my records and then following back up with them. And back in those days, there wasn't CRM. No one knew. Salesforce.com wasn't around. People didn't know, but Act and Goldmine, some of these others were around where people were starting to use them. And it was always interesting to me, people who didn't use some form of keeping track of that. Like, how do you keep track of page 713 that you talked to this person? There's no way of actually doing that and doing it very well. So to have a system that could prompt me, at the appropriate times to follow back up with people was just so critical. Today, those things have evolved in such a miraculous way of how now, we're tying data that, not lo and behold, we're in a different place than we were in the mid-90s. Now there's so much data available to us that, we're in business-to-business sales. You can use LinkedIn and LinkedIn Sales Navigator and pull some of that data directly into a CRM system, and you have all that data pretty closely available to you. But it's just so critical because in most cases these days it's really around, creating that client experience. And it's still baffling to me to go into organizations that really don't understand and properly use, or maybe in some cases even have a customer relationship management system. And I think to myself, what kind of experience are they creating for their customer? If the people that are actually interacting with your customers the most are not keeping record of things, this would be no different than if you and I, both work with Cooperative Computing and someone calls in, one of our clients calls in, and Jim's not here today, you take the call. You want to at least know the records of what's Jim's interactions, how we serve the client, and all that stuff can live in a CRM that then gets carried out through the rest of the customer journey. And yet the real important point is that, it's like first impressions mean a lot. It's that first impression means, hey, you've got to, in the courting of the relationship, you've got to do a really good job of keeping track of that information, building a relationship, and that's what those CRM systems really help us do.
As I see it with CRM, there's three critical components here. There's one is choosing the right CRM. The second component is inputting the data. And the third component is using the data. So if we look at those three different areas, firstly, choosing the right CRM. How difficult is that for you when you start working out with a company? Because there is an awful lot of choices these days, ranging from free to expensive. So cost is one factor. How it integrates with different technologies might be another factor. And also general ease of use and suitable to the business. So, what are the main things that you're looking for with a business, and how do you actually help come up with what the right choice is?
Yeah, it's a great question. And in fact, the third one probably answers the first one for me because normally what we will do is go in fact, we're working with an organization right now, good sized organization, about 70 salespeople, no CRM. This organization has been around for over 35 years. It's amazing to me. And yet, and I get it. And so part of it is to go to that third one that you talked about is that how are people actually going to use it? This organization, as we go in and start interviewing and understanding the process, and we do really deep dive in the organization through kind of this digital maturity experience that we walk through with them to understand where are they on the digital maturity journey. Part of what really plays into selecting the right CRM is how the people are actually. You got to understand the people first. It's like how are they actually going to use it, and so most of these people have lived in spreadsheets and on their mobile phones. And so we take that into consideration around, okay, in selecting the right CRM, the first thing you got to do is realize who's actually going to use it because we can, we've been in environments where we've tried to get, implement a CRM or convince people that this is the right CRM. And yet if their people aren't ready to use it and they're not going to adopt it, it's going to fail. And so, the first thing is that selection process has a lot to do with that mapping out, their methods and procedures, like how do they go about conducting business with their customers and understanding that really, really well. And then it's about, okay, their current organizational capability of what can their organization actually do today with that system. The second one that you mentioned was just the data component. And, they're naturally with it, most of them out there today, they have some connectors into different data platforms that can provide data where it makes it simpler for people like me. If I go out and meet with someone today, I want to get it logged in the CRM. Anyone on our team should be getting that information logged in the CRM. And there's ways of automating that process where it doesn't mean that Jim has to sit down and type up Anthony, first name, last name, enter all the company name and all of that. There's ways that you can go pull that data and pull it right in with a couple of clicks. And so that's the second component, is just making sure, okay, are we actually getting are we selecting a platform that's going to make it easy for them to pull in data, depending on how many, the company I just referenced a minute ago, actually they don't have that many new contacts. They do business with about 75 to 100 companies, and it's a B2B business. And that their contacts relatively remain the same. They'll have some turnover with some of them, but not a whole lot. So that component's not as sensitive to them as the organizational capability of them to actually use the tool. So that's the second, and then the third, it goes right to what you were talking about. It's like it's helping them understand how to use the tool. I relate back to probably 2001. I was part of an organization, was in a sales leadership role, had a small team, 15 or so people at the time, and the organization was rolling out Salesforce.com, whether we liked it or not. That was almost like they were rolling it out, and the way it was communicated throughout the organization was, you're going to use this. And so it was being received from the sales organization like, okay, well, it's management rolling it out. They want us to enter data so they can know everything that we're doing. And so we kind of flipped it a little bit. I took the top two salespeople on our team and said, okay, I'm going to take these people. We're going to spend a little bit of time with these folks that are rolling it out. We're going to understand it a little bit better to help design the experience where it helps them. It helps them, sell. It helps them win. It helps them serve their clients. And when we took that approach and we were able to take a couple of top performers and build it for their needs, it was much more acceptable to the others to make sure that they would all actually use it, because they were seeing a couple of high performing peers use the technology, and they also knew that those top performing peers had a lot of influence on the design and implementation of how it was actually going to be used, so that it wasn't all the clutter of management needs this type of data, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because it's an important thing, isn't it? That usability, because yes, there's a certain amount of automated things, as you say. You don't necessarily need to type in people's names directly and things, but there is information that needs to go in, and it is about training people in terms of a habit of making sure that's inputted on a consistent basis. Because if you don't do it almost daily, and really it probably does have to be daily, then you very quickly lose that information. And I guess the real value of the CRM is in being able to track where you are in the course of a conversation with people, and remember those things that might trigger the personalization. So you remember that, we captured the wife and children's names last time, so we can ask about that, which immediately disarms people in a sales conversation by making them feel more personal. Those little things make a huge difference, but that's the kind of stuff that you have to capture and put in there.
Oh, absolutely. And this is Anthony. This is so interesting because I just think about the details of the notes that I likely took back in the mid '90s, putting in Daytime Organizer, and I think about like now we use HubSpot here, and we have an AI note taker that joins all of these teams and Zoom calls that we're on, and it records and it categorizes and it puts in the minutes together at the end. It puts action items. It builds the action items directly into HubSpot, and I'm not touching anything. And I think about the day that I was having to go through, and then I'd have to say, okay, what your daughter's name was what again? It's like, and it's kind of like you had to be really good at note taking. Now I find myself where I can tune in more with the client. I can pay more close attention. I don't have to make sure I take every note the whole time, but I've got these capabilities now, which goes back to your second point, which is you need to make sure that it can integrate with the tools that allow you to be much more effective. So it's interesting to me when we finish these calls and someone will say, "Hey, you get your AI note taker on here. Are you okay sending me over the notes?" And we'll send it over, and they will literally respond back and go, "Wow, that's amazing!" And it's got the whole recording, so you can actually click into it wherever and say, hey, "Wait a second, I don't remember talking about this." You can click right into it, takes you right back to the recording. It's got it all transcribed behind it, and so there's this digital technology out there these days that just allows us to do miraculous things that I think about. Wow, if I'd had this back in the '90s, no telling how effective I would have been with what I was doing. But we had to go on that journey. I had to be on that journey to understand and appreciate what we have available to us today.
I think what's interesting, side effect of all of this is your ability to remember things seems to be less these days. I literally had it, I think it was yesterday, where I was having a meeting with someone, and we'd agreed to another meeting time. I hung up the call and I went, what time did I say I was going to have that meeting on what day? And thank goodness the note taking tool was there. Was able to go back and double check. Yes, it was going to be 2:30 on Thursday. Great, put that in. All good. And we can't. That's the point, that you come to rely on these tools. And I think what's even a step further with a lot of them is there's an AI integrated into it. So it's not just a matter of randomly searching through a transcript. You've got an AI tool that said, what did Jim say about the kind of CRM that he uses? And it'll immediately come up with a response and said, Jim talked about HubSpot.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also super helpful. Just minor things like that. I kind of think about now as we're talking through this that we take advantage of. But it's like usually 3 or 4 times a week we'll be involved with the client on a call, and it'll get to a point where it's decently technical. There's someone that's involved that ends up bringing up something that I'll need to get an engineer involved in our next call. And so what I'll do in a lot of those cases is as we finish the call, I'll just take that and I'll tag in CRM, I'll just tag the appropriate engineer and say, "Hey, Anthony, when you get a chance, take a look at this third bullet point down. He's talking about this, and I didn't fully understand it, but you and I are going to need to circle back on it so we can understand, how can we help them with that." And those little things, and it's amazing to me because then, an hour later in Teams, I'll get a message that says, "Hey, Jim, I listened to that. Here's what he's talking about. Holler at me if you want to talk through it." And it's like, it makes us so much more effective. And for me to know that even in that particular example, in that one example I just used, literally happened yesterday, and the engineer that I was communicating with was in Northern California, which is a good 4 or 5 hour flight from Dallas. And so here's this person halfway across the country that I'm tagging in something, and within an hour he's messaging me back, and it's like I never even had to have a conversation with him, but all of the data still resided there, and it made me much more effective with the customer and making sure I could help accommodate their needs.
And it goes one step further, really, doesn't it? Because when you're getting multiple people, for example, asking about a similar question or a similar thing, then it can lead to, okay, maybe as a company, we need to develop something more in order to be able to cope with this, or we need an extra training manual, or we're getting lots of questions about this. it can provide new opportunities as well to develop, because the more that you're capturing that data everywhere, the more that it's the greater understanding of where the possibilities are, just from that point of view, to grow the business.
Yeah, yeah, we're in a digital world now, and there's a digital trail and digital journey on everything. And the more you can capture of that digital journey, the more data is available to help you better serve your clients.
I did want to circle back to the discussion around the CRM in terms of how to choose the right one, because I know you talked about HubSpot, but there are many out there, aren't there? And HubSpot's not necessarily the right one for every business. And I think that's a challenge. And there's always new ones that come into the mix. I know there's a lot of chat these days about Go High Level. That seems to be the one that everyone's talking about. But there's a myriad of them out there, and you and I could probably name about 10 without thinking too hard about it. So trying to work through that, and as you're coming into a business and assessing if they have got one, you know, whether they should move or whether they're maximizing it, and equally then being able to go, okay, maybe you should move over here to this one. How difficult is that process in just keeping on top of that one piece of technology?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So I would say there's a couple of thoughts here. One is, if they have one and it's decently effective, and like you said, there's a dozen of them out there that are pretty darn effective, and you could flip a coin and there's some differences in them, but most of them are pretty darn effective for most of what people do. If they have one today and they're actually using it, our whole approach to digital enablement is to help fully enable it for automation, personalization, and data-driven decision making. That's what we see more than anything. Is in some cases it's rolled out. It's the organization may be using it, but they almost use it in silos of how they use it, or one individual person uses it this way, the organization doesn't use it as a whole. So in a lot of cases, we really get into, okay, let's figure out, was it actually deployed in a good manner? Like, in other words, did they actually think through their methods and procedures of how they deal with clients and document that so that they could marry it into that experience, that CRM experience? And if it's not, then we sometimes just help re-engineer that. Like, let's just re-engineer the process and figure out, how do we help. You and I both have spent enough time in CRMs to know that there's way too many fields in most of them. It's like, okay, so the key is, how do you minimize, all of the information to make someone super effective without going too deep with too many fields? And so that's our first approach. When we get to the approach where, okay, it is time to change, because there are some out there that are really good for small businesses. So if you get to 20 million in revenue with 20 salespeople, your experience and needs are probably a lot different than when you get to a $1.5 billion company and you have hundreds of salespeople. So in that particular case, in a lot of cases, it's just part of the growth journey, and that just becomes, okay, now let's go back to organizational capability and the methods and procedures, and let's identify, what's the customer journey? How have you documented your customer journey? What do you want that customer journey to be? And now let's decide what are the best tools to be able to accommodate that. And if the one that you got today is sufficient, awesome. If it's not, then it's time to start looking at others. And when we go look at others, we look at it from the capacity of thinking, okay, what size organization are we talking about? What's their organizational capabilities and methods and procedures that we need to make sure we marry up with that customer journey throughout that process, so that when we help influence towards the right solution, that's what we're doing.
I think the important thing for a lot of these businesses, of course, is looking at it and saying, well, what's the advantage, particularly if you start talking about moving, because you want to be able to create efficiencies and better outcomes. But there's also the issue of rolling it out, because you've got a bunch of people who are very familiar with one, and getting them to turn around and say, now we're going to shift over here and do this one. And things that were over here are now over here, and all of that sort of stuff that you've got to cope with. That's a difficult decision as well for business, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's and in our experience, it's the in the carrot and the stick analogy. It's like, hey, at some point you've got to help them be a part of the process, and that's one of the things I see is that we often see as a failure is not having the right stakeholders involved in the process to make sure, if you're rolling out a new CRM, you need sales champions involved in that process. They need to be able to be the champions that can help influence the way it's selected, the way it's rolled out, and the way it's used. And that's just a really critical component. So it's making people be part of the process, or allowing them to be a part of the process so they're empowered to have influence in the decision is so critical.
That brings us to the end of this episode of Get Enabled Digitally. I'd like to thank Jim Barker for sharing his insights and expertise today. And if you found value in our conversation, please subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform and leave us a review, because your feedback helps us continue to deliver quality content that matters to you. For more information about cooperative computing and how they can help your organization accelerate into the automated economy, check out the links in our show notes. Have questions or topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes? You'll find our contact information in the show notes as well. This show has been produced by podcastdoneforyou.online. I'm Anthony Perl, and until next time, keep moving forward to get enabled digitally.